You are listening to the Yoga for Balance podcast. I'm your host, Haidari. Thank you so much for listening. I am back after a little summer hiatus, unplanned, but please forgive me. I was spending some time back in Wisconsin and just soaking up that summer sunshine over the 4th. I hope that you are doing well and that your summer's off to a wonderful start. It's a hot one here in San Diego. Finally, our June gloom clouds have moved along and we have sunshine again. So I'm loving that. I am a beach girl. I like to take my rollerblades by the beach. To me, it's a mindful meditation, moving meditation, as well as, of course, just spending time at the beach, listening to the ocean. Meditating, doing yoga there is always very wonderful. Let's start this week's episode again with a nice deep breath, an opportunity to ground wherever you are in your day, in your life. Just let it all go for a moment. Take a deep breath in of fresh prana. Open mouth, exhale, release. Take 2 more like that, even deeper. One more. Pack your lungs with that fresh energy. Check in. If you're somewhere where it's possible, you may close your eyes. Bring hands over your heart. Feel your heartbeat. And just ask in your hearts how you are doing in this moment. Give yourself a little love for doing your best, wherever it is, however you are. And I'm so glad you're here. This week on the Yoga for Balance podcast, I have my friend Naveed Heydari. This was written by a friend of his. Naveed is an artist of his world. He sees space that others pass by. He sees people that others pass by, and brings them together in the most brilliant ways. He's infused connection and creativity with his neighbors in a space that is often literally built to keep neighbors apart, with fences and large plots. He does not abide by those fences. He dedicates his free time to teaching life-changing yoga. I've already felt it myself. That is accessible to everyone. Whenever I turn my back on him for a second, he's sitting at a new table making friends with strangers, asking them questions rather than talking about himself. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Welcome, Naveed, to the Yoga for Balance podcast. Naveed is another fellow Durga tiger rider. We met during our time in Ecuador. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me and for putting these on.
It's my pleasure. Seriously, it's so rewarding for me having these conversations and being able to reconnect with you. This is our first time chatting semi-face-to-face here since our training. And yeah, wow, a year and a half later, here we are.
Yeah, I was thinking actually of I remember the day I met you. I didn't really meet you, but you were downstairs on like a call with someone. And I remember hearing you and like all these judgments within me were coming up about like who you were. And I was making a lot of assumptions about who you were. And it was just beautiful that during our month there, I think it was towards the end too, we connected over kind of losing close friends. And it was just nice to see as we progressed through that. It wasn't just with you, but you were a good example of that, like how almost with each person, like all of those assumptions dissolved and I got to see like the true oneness that exists. So I found that to be like something really memorable.
Yeah, especially in that scenario, we just had so many different personalities, people from all over the world. our ideas of who someone from South Africa is, or from
Mm-hmm.
this other part of the world, or you from Denver and me from
Mm-hmm.
California. You hear this California girl on the phone. What is this thing? And what does that mean about her? And then we sort of just stripped it all down. And I find that yoga does that in general, is on the mat. I teach corporate yoga, and I'm teaching the VP of some department as well as the front desk person at this company. And it's like, when we're on our yoga mat and when we're going through that healing process, and when we're looking at these different defining points of our lives, like losing someone so close, it just kind of brings everything down to the ground level of like, we're all just human beings doing this thing called life and experiencing things. And regardless of where we're from, where we're going, like, we just experience these fundamental life things, and learning to navigate through those, and also just seeing how we're the same in some of those ways. I don't know. It's really an interesting way to look at things.
Yeah, I feel like that seems to be what it's most about with any yoga practice, is like moving closer to the ground, because it's at that ground level that we really feel like the connection we have with each other. And it's probably through the earth. Like even here, as I'm kneeling down on like a rug that's on top of hardwood floor, that's on top of a bunch of concrete, like that's different than being out in some grass and feeling the connection of the land. And then sharing that with others, having a few of us sit there as we did in between sessions. We would often move. I'm speaking about our time in Ecuador. We'd often move outside. After the San Pedro ceremony too, there was a really nice connection that occurred in some of those grassy patches. Yes. Very messy.
Very earthy.
I
Oh
had
boy.
papaya all over my face, I believe.
You are very much one with the earth. There really is nothing quite like bonding over fruit in grass on a beautiful day. And after just having such a mind-opening experience. What was your experience, if you could look back now and just recount of San Pedro and of that plant medicine for anyone who maybe has considered doing their own plant medicine ceremony? We haven't really talked too much about that here on the show yet.
Yeah, I've done the San Pedro ceremony. I've done 2 of them, and then I've also had some of the medicine. Oops, I think I'm taking photos of you, but I've also done 2 kind of experiences outside of the true ceremony. For me, it's been just extremely positive, and especially in smaller doses. Like that night we had it during our yoga training, we had it in a smaller dose. And that was nice. Like I've done it once at a higher dose, and it just kind of overrides the system. It's almost like too much love, too much epiphany, too much idealism, that it's really hard to integrate that experience afterwards. So the smaller doses were really better for me, and they also were better during the day, which isn't the way that ceremonies, San Pedro ceremonies, at least in Ecuador, are done, and probably in most of South America. I'm not sure across the world, but the day energy for me feels a lot better. And the night one just, it's not that it's dark. It's not like that it was seeing darkness within me. It's more that I just like to sleep at night. I like to sleep at night and be up during the day. So it just makes sense for me to do things during the day.
Practically. So I was so tired waiting for the shamans to come in, and then taking the hour to set up and I explained that to people. I did a Tantra yoga workshop a couple months ago here in San Diego, and was kind of setting the altar up for the first 5-10 minutes in front of people, and I was like, you guys, this is part of the process, is kind of seeing why we're putting the things out that we are, and realizing they all kind of have an integral part of the process. And in that case, it started about midnight. We were fasting leading up to that, so everyone was pretty hungry. I was semi-fasting. I get pretty hangry pretty fast, so I'm like, yeah, I just need a little bit, a little bit. And they also weren't super stringent there on that part of the aspect. They're like, yeah, eat lighter, but you don't need to completely fast in that case. And I know depending on who you're working with, where you're doing it, it'll be different. So listen to the people guiding you, of course. Um, but then, they had people come in. First of all, they kind of came late with their tribe, and then they all sort of came in there, and it was a very masculine led ceremony. And then you had someone building the fire inside the middle of the yoga studio for that 20 minutes. And that was part of watching that. And then the flowers were getting set up around the circle with the grandchildren of that tribe and of that. And I don't know if they were a literal tribe, but that group of people and shamans that came in to run that ceremony. And I thought that was a really learning aspect of it too, that don't be so impatient of the process, like the process and the actual setup and each component, and understanding each component and the role that it plays is part of the process. And I think all of our Western minds are wanting to get right to the medicine, or wanting to get right to the point of the ceremony. And it's like, well, no, the ceremony is the point. So I try to include that learning in the different ceremony and things related to Tantra that I do here, that having patience in the process is part of the process.
Yeah, I feel like inclined to ask you, and maybe this is supposed to be about me, but I feel like it can be about you, right? Like a lot of what I'm thinking about recently is just the art of rituals, and like, how do I bring rituals to my own life in a meaningful way that's not like, it wouldn't make sense for me to like copy what the Shuar tribe did in Ecuador to do San Pedro. And maybe that's why I didn't love that experience as much, because it didn't like align with my own, what was calling within me. And then yet I took that San Pedro outside of that experience and made it into my own personal ritual. And that felt really good. So I'm called to ask to you, like, now, like, what are some like rituals that you've been practicing, either in yoga or just in life, which is yoga probably for us?
Yeah, I mean, my meditation's probably my number one ritual. Before being in Ecuador, I didn't have a consistent meditation practice. I was definitely dabbling, and I knew it was good for me, but I wasn't really adapting it in my lifestyle. And then after being there and starting our day 6:30 a.m. with meditation, and I think I've talked about this on the show before, I'm the type that if I have something laid out for me and I have access to something, I really feel like, okay, I need to take advantage of this. Like, this is part of the path. This is part of, I need to experience this, and maybe I'll take it or leave it at the end. And I think that's what I learned is like, okay, what parts, like you said, are going to resonate with me and are going to long-term play a part and a role in my rituals and in my practice and my lifestyle. And I found starting my day with meditation was probably the most profound one that I took away with me, that I literally get up before I do anything. If it's a good day, if I'm not rushing, if I'm not getting up late, we have an altar in our place with a chakra banner and all of the stones kind of laid out where I could see them, the different stones I've sort of collected from my time in different places. So I have my crystals, my stones, Palo Santo or sage. So that was something I really took away from our ceremonies with Tati. We worked with a shaman there named Tati, and Ruben, her husband, for a majority of the time. I'd say Tati was our main shaman we worked with. So I'll use my San Pedro or Palo Santo and cleanse myself, cleanse the space before I go into the practice. I use cards, which hasn't really come from Ecuador. That was, I think, more something I just came across in different teachers here that I was working with and in different practices. So I usually have like a card deck or two that I lay out. I light a candle for the Palo Santo or sage, and then I set a timer, and I, for at least 10 minutes, try to sit and meditate for that time. And after practicing with Hector and the different healers we had in Ecuador, I sort of have different styles of meditation I can lead myself through at this point. So I don't typically do any sort of led meditation. But I found that is a really helpful daily practice and ritual that if I start my day like that, I really feel grounded, clear, connected. I feel like I can go through the chakras usually. And I just start knowing the day started with something for myself. And I find that really comes through in the classes I lead during that day, any other experiences that I'm leading. Just if I'm even spending the day on the computer, I feel more clear that I am on the right path, or I've had a chance to think about the things that are important for me that day, and whatever came up, I get some clarity on. And then in the yoga classes that I teach as well, I bring in some of those aspects. So I'm definitely the teacher that burns sage or Palo Santo before the classes. My students will be like, "Oh, I smelled the sage coming up. I knew you were teaching," and it excited me. So I typically will like cleanse the space before and after the class before, and I'm really intentionally doing that. I'm not just burning sage so people smell sage. I'm burning it and wafting it through the room and sort of cleansing the energy, not knowing what really went down in that class before me. Let's create kind of a clear space for the healing that I want to take part in the experience I'm about to lead down. And sometimes I'll bring the chakra, the stones in with me that will align if I'm doing a chakra class or something. I'll actually lead students through like a 7-week chakra clearing program and not really a program, it's a little informal, but I'll say, okay, we're going to start with the root chakras and then work our way up. And I'll maybe bring crystals in or essential oils in that I feel align with that. So yeah, I think those are probably the most impact, like that's how I bring ritual into sort of my day-to-day things that I'm doing and what I'm doing in my work and in my classes. And of course, if there's workshops and things like that I'm leading, I'll amp that up a little bit. So maybe bring in flowers or something that make it feel a little more ceremonial. And we did that a lot in Durga's Tiger School. There were fresh flowers we'd arrange. And if it was kind of more of a workshop or an experience we were doing, we'd have music and we'd have essential oils going or, our essence going in the room. So yeah, I definitely have incorporated a lot more of that stuff since Ecuador and into the different teaching I'm doing to make it feel like an experience and a ceremony. And we're kind of setting up this space for healing. What about you?
Yeah, what was coming to me as you were speaking a lot actually was like the ritual of teaching. When I had met you, I hadn't taught many courses of yoga. That was like a first experience probably. And since then, I've been teaching pretty consistently, maybe 4 times a week. And then a lot more classes when I went back to Ecuador, and I was teaching maybe 6 or 7 a week. And those were in Spanish too. So it was another kind of nice hurdle and challenge for me. There is like this meditative state that I feel like we as teachers can enter into during the course of the class. And I will bring up Kaiut Yoga, which is the style of yoga that I'm teaching. In this style, the teacher never practices with the student, which I find to be really helpful to just hold that space for the students. I've actually tried with my family here because it's been informal. I'm like, I'll just practice with you guys. And I do, and it's fun, but it's very different, I think, especially from their perspective and from mine, when instead of practicing with the students, I am standing and I'm kind of walking the room and I'm collecting data and I'm really changing like what I am saying or the inflection of my voice or who I'm directing. Yeah, like I get to play around a little bit more with the styles of teaching. And it is like a different type of meditative state. It's not the same as when I'm on my mat and I'm doing like my personal practice, but it does bring about this other like very rejuvenating state. Like it might still have pieces similar to like entering into that nice parasympathetic mode. And I say that only because there are some times where I don't really feel like teaching, right? Like there's just stuff on my mind, or like I know it's going to be some challenging students here on this day. And always, if done really with the right mindset, after that class is over, those thoughts just don't persist. They've totally morphed into like just a lot of gratitude that that I was willing to like put that aside and step into the present moment. And I think that's what it's about, like both practice and teaching, and then extending that to our daily lives. Like this yoga style, and I feel like most yoga styles, really, it's like, how do we create this very chronic state of presence so that we are like so powerfully present? Because if we are powerfully present, and right now I'm like kind of feeling that with you, just because we're making good connection. And I feel like because of that, like I am being drawn to like my best and my brightest self, and there's no effort there. Like if I think about the analogy I like to use lately, because I've been planting a bunch of trees, we plant these small little trees, they're like 2 feet. And I imagine like if this little tree thinks about like that big tree that he wants to be one day, that's going to totally cut off a lot of the energy needed for that little tree to actually do photosynthesis and turn into that big tree one day. And we know that trees don't have that, that silly human behavior that we do, that is probably learned to like think so much about like, oh, I'm not enough as I am right now. I can't wait to be this big tree. And that little tree is like really just being in the present and saying, I am beautiful as I am. And I'm going to soak up the nutrients that I'm given in this moment with plenty in abundance for me to thrive. And then before we know it, it's a slow process, but it's a very gentle process too. That little tree that I've been planting in a few years will become those big trees that provide shades and apples and other fruits for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's that feeling. It's hard to explain, but where there's just a point in that meditate. I'm glad you brought that up when you're teaching, and I feel like you just feel it. It's like time stops, and when the energy, as a teacher, you're present. You could tell the students are present. Everyone is there in the room, where it's almost like time stops and you're looking at everything in slow motion, and like, oh yes, that was what we needed to get to. And I think we can forget about that yoga, it means to yoke, to join mind, body, spirit. All of these varieties of asana practice, the different ways of getting there have been developed because we're all different people with different problems, different complications, that have different issues with different things that get to that place. But that's what it's about. So however you can get there, it's whether it's Tantra yoga, Vinyasa yoga, Kaiut yoga, whatever it is for you, it's finding that place. And to your point as a teacher, if you could be really present in the room, not practicing. I think that's kind of a crutch I found is when I was first teaching Vinyasa, I thought I had to be doing it to be a good student, or I think it was more, I was nervous to not do it. What if I forget? What if I don't feel it in my body? Will I know where to tell them? But no, you're so much more able to be present for the energy of the room, to keep that energy sort of flowing, to feel what your students need, to draw back, to give them the break when they need it, to change course when it's necessary. And you feel that in the room when it clicks and there's just that moving, flowing energy. There's nothing like that. It's amazing.
Yeah, and I was looking through your podcast list, and that's actually what brought me a lot of joy. And I see this, I think right now in Boulder, they have the Hanuman Festival, and it's a convergence of all these yoga styles. And I'm like constantly reminded that doesn't really matter what we do. Like it's really doesn't matter if it's the types of yoga that we've listed. It's really kind of why we are doing it. And it feels like if it allows us to bring more consciousness to our mind, because we are through the exploration of like finding these restrictions that exist, I think that is like the key of yoga, because it works the same way yoga theories have always worked. And the Tantra theory really is based in this, which is like finding restrictions, but through this really deep state of relaxation, right? That kind of shocked me with a lot of the work we were doing there. And even in this yoga style, the reason I like it so much is because it is moving us into a different state that is very counter to our outside of like the mat. But if you do enough of it, maybe you've noticed too, like it transfers into other parts of our lives, like the excitement that I might normally feel, the anxiety that I might normally feel, like, oh, like we're doing a podcast, like I'm important and I feel like I'm being listened to. A lot of that just goes away. It's like I'm back in the present, and it just feels good to be here with you and have this conversation. Yeah.
It does. I'm so glad that it reconnected us. So yeah, let's talk about Kaiut Yoga, because I know for one, I had never heard of that style of yoga prior to meeting you, and I know it's really profoundly impacted you, and it's a style that you primarily have chosen to teach, I believe, correct? So would you mind just talking a little bit about that and what someone might expect in that kind of yoga experience?
Yeah. I'd say, I guess I'll give a little background about the founder, but then I'll probably transition more into my own relationship with the practice, because that feels like it just is more emotional and powerful, and maybe something that you and others can relate to. But Francisco Kaiut is the founder of this yoga, and he's coming from Brazil. At a very young age, around 6 years old, he was just accidentally shot in the hip by a cousin. They were just playing around with the gun because they were in a kind of wartime state. And from there, he kind of always had these chronic hip and back and everything related to, the hip issues. And he became a chiropractor to try and figure out what was going on, both within himself and within others. He has a very deep care for kind of the well-being of others. And he really sees that the current way that we are aging doesn't have to be that way. He thinks that, and probably because he's seen examples through his work now, that we can age and actually be more vital and not necessarily lose all this mobility that we think we have to lose through aging. Especially here in the West, we have that tendency and that idea, and it's reflected, right, in the fact that many aging people are in nursing homes and they're struggling and they have to have teams of caregivers, whereas maybe in the East we see more examples, but it's shifting there too, of older folks who are kind of still living and they're able to take care of themselves. Needless to say, he studied all these different yoga styles. And basically one day it came to him as he was working with several different of his chiropractic clients. He envisioned all of these chiropractic tables, which are elevated. He saw them all like melting into the ground and becoming yoga mats. And so he saw like what a great opportunity this is to bring some of the chiropractic theories into the yoga world. So he's been teaching now over 20 years. He has his founding studio in a place called Curitiba, Brazil. And actually at the end of my most recent Ecuador trip, I went there and I got to see some of his students that he's had for 15 plus years. They're now in their 70s, and it is just pretty incredible to see that they even say that themselves, they will say, like, I look older, like I look at the mirror and it looks like I've aged, but I can't feel that at all. Wow. And so to hear that it was nice to see that example, because here in the US, we still don't have too many examples of long-standing Kaiut practices. Boulder would be the number one place. So it's nice that I'm here in Denver, pretty close, 45 minutes away from Boulder. It's now gaining a lot more popularity. And I actually, so kind of transitioning now to my story, I hadn't heard of Kaiut Yoga when I was living in Denver. It was actually when I moved to Ecuador, and I was studying mosquitoes on the coast. And every month, about once a month, we would have to go to the capital city, Quito, and we would give a presentation about just the updates of our mosquito work. And I was just feeling like a disconnect of my body. I was overworking myself. I just had so much tension, probably from sitting all the time and being on the computer, and just being in that like project manager mindset, which is always like problem solving and never really being in the present. It's always like predicting like what the future problem might be and then pouncing. So it's very sympathetic, right? The nervous system. In many ways, it's like a fight or flight or react and respond and even play. Like all of that existed in the same realm, and that is a good place to be, but probably just a minority of the time. And I was in it a majority of the time. So in Quito, I just typed into Google search yoga studios, and like 8 different ones came up that were near the hostel that I was staying at during that specific trip. And I just decided to go to one. Happened to be, I didn't care what class it was. It's like, I just want any yoga and any connection. It happened to be a Kaiut Yoga class, and it was taught by this young kid named Pablo. He was about our age. I think he's 31 now. And during the class, we were doing some different, very, very simple poses, which is what Kaiut Yoga is always is founded in simplicity. It was just like interlocking our fingers underneath our head, maybe with the bolster. And I just felt like so much emotions coming up, mainly of like, wow, like I didn't even realize how much tension has been stored up here. And probably what was most emotional about that was like, that after the class, it was raining and I was walking back home and I was just like bawling, like crying. And it was this feeling of like, I didn't realize that this tension existed. And just by like touching it and just by having the awareness that it's there, that gave me like an opportunity, or like it just put the body in the natural process to be cleaning out those restrictions. Like I didn't have to do anything about it. All I had to do was just sit with it and feel it. And then the whole healing process initiated on its own. And so I felt all that, cried my way home. Every month that I would come back to Quito, I would go to that same yoga studio. Pablo and I became really close friends. And it was like that for about 8 months. And right before I met you guys, it was, I think we met in mid-February. It was around my birthday. Early January of that same year, after I'd been going to see Pablo for a year, my mom and my grandma and my dad came to visit. My mom is Ecuadorian. My grandma was born and lived there for many years. And we went out to dinner with some family friends. And they told me, I was telling them my story of this yoga. And they were like really interested, like, oh, what's the name of that studio? And what's the name of that kid? I'm like, oh, it's Pablo from Yoga 108. And they were like shocked because they told me Pablo is actually related to you. Like you and he share great grandpa. So they drew it on a napkin in the restaurant. Yeah.
Wow.
And I saw like, wow, like, yeah, my great grandpa was a big time, like, he slept around, let's say. And he had many different partners and wives, and I guess like the male slut is what I want to say, which like now I know where I get some of that from. But so yeah, I reached out to Pablo. Pablo had no idea, and that was like the synchronicity that seals our bond. And at that point, it was like there was no doubt in my mind, because the yoga practice was already speaking to me, and really getting into my restrictions in a very gentle but effective way. And then finding out the synchronicity that Pablo and I were related. He was telling me that in April of that year, he was going to a training in Toronto. And I was like, okay, great, I'm going. I went to see you guys at the Durga Tiger School. And during that month, like there would be like one day a week that I would sneak out and I'd go take a Kaiut Yoga class with Pablo, because I love that style. And it was nothing against, Tantra or the team. It was more, as we discussed, like it's whatever style that speaks to you. And this one I really like. Its slogan is kind of yoga para todo el mundo in Brazilian, yoga para todo mundo, kind of similar to Spanish. Because of its simplicity, it really allows for all ages and people with all sorts of ailments to come in and step into that practice. And Toronto and now in Boulder, I'm seeing that is always the case. Like, I'm usually the youngest one there. And besides like my history of tennis, playing tennis for many years, and in college having some shoulder and hip issues and knee issues, most people are coming in there with some pretty serious injuries. And it's great to see that this practice is working and effective. It's not scaring them off, as I've seen with other certain practices before. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that seems to be like a good starting point. But yeah, what are your thoughts hearing that, Heather?
Yeah, I want to try. And I mean, that's, something that inspired me to try something other than vinyasa, because I agree. I've had some students in my class, and vinyasa is tough. Like, if you are only introduced to vinyasa, or that's a style you think you should be practicing, your ego's telling you, I gotta do the handstand and work my way up to these crazy advanced asanas. It's like, whew, like there's more than one way. I urge people to try many different things. I think often the style that bothers you ever. I think we talked about this, and I saw this in a lot of students, in addition to myself, that initially Tantra and a really slower style, restorative, yin even, was really hard for me. It was really frustrating. I didn't want to sit there with myself. I was then experiencing much more my mind and having to do more of the meditative practice of coming back to a peaceful place and turning the mind off, since the body wasn't distracting me anymore. But I found that's what I really needed. And when something's hard, and when like you came home crying from that class, I felt so frustrated after those first slow yoga experiences. It's like, that's what I need. Like, that's what I really need to find balance. So leaning into the discomfort of those experiences and recognizing this is uncomfortable because it's something I need, I think has been really powerful for me.
Yeah, the system, like, it's just so self-aware in many ways, and it like knows how to recalibrate if we allow ourselves to like trust the inner nature within. And I find that these practices, and it goes beyond yoga too, it goes to any practice where you're allowing yourself to feel. Because I think that's kind of, if we look at maybe like the deeper, really deep symptom of our time, we are a society that we are really averse to feeling. Any feeling that comes up, the first thing we will do, my dad's a great example, I use him, he will take an Advil, right, or a Tylenol. Like, if there's any little back pain that comes, you just want to like crush the symptom, right? It's the same. Now I'm in this farming world. If you have pests that are coming, you just spray pesticides. Like, oh, good, solve the problem, we're all good. If you have a bacteria or some sort of illness, like, pop some medication, like, oh, good, I've solved that. And that sort of mentality, I think, like, pervades everywhere, even to our yoga style. Like, many styles still, I think, because we've just adopted this Western approach, we still are just like trying to use it like we use some of this holistic wellness stuff, which I love holistic wellness. But if you're just going to like a massage just to get rid of the feeling, I sometimes question that for myself. I'm like, what am I really trying to get rid of? And is it important for me to feel this hip pain? I call it pain, but really my body's now reading that, like, we can reframe that as like, this is just strong sensation. And by allowing ourselves to sit there with that sensation, it gives the body a chance to feel and then heal that space. And so I think that's what, like, I love about this practice, and really what will guide kind of everything in my life now is like, I'm like a junkie for feeling now. And it makes sense, given that my, like, and unlike a lot of college students, like, smoked a lot of weed and did a lot of drugs, and the goal was to like not feel. And going back to like our San Pedro, you can take like a high enough dose so that you really don't feel. But if you take a smaller dose of anything, oftentimes you can't fully like escape what you're trying to like go around. And instead, sometimes it's good to just like confront it head on, but that has to be done in a gentle way too, because if it's too much all at once, then the whole system will be feeling kind of not very trustworthy of the process. And that's why having, teachers such as yourself, such as myself, and other beautiful teachers that really like practice what they are teaching is important, because then there's this like level of trust that I hear in your words, or that I hope students hear in my words, that it's not just like speaking. It's like we've gone through this process, and therefore there's some like weight behind some of the words that we're saying.
But yeah, I think that's a good point. The first time someone comes to this practice and they really sit with their feelings and feel what they're feeling, I think it could be hard, I think it could scare people off from coming back to their yoga mat because they may not be ready for it, So what would you say to someone listening that's kind of dabbled in that, felt maybe too much? And it's, I think most people at this point listening, if they're really taking yoga as a lifestyle seriously, they've kind of made it past that hurdle. But I think that was me for my first few years. I discovered yoga in college, and same thing. I was at the very much high speed frequency, packing my schedule with every possible thing I could. Work hard, play hard. I mean, literally. Yeah. And since then, it's like, oh no, and I found yoga, but I was like, oh no, this isn't for me. Like, no, this isn't good. I think as I've experienced more deeply earth-shattering things like losing people and facing really hard times in my life, that I found like there's no escaping these feelings. There's no escaping the results of those earth-shattering things. How much better to let myself actually sit with and feel it, to get to the other side, to feel the light. Because I think, to your point, that's the only way we're going to heal. Otherwise, it's just going to carry in our body somewhere, and it's going to be just waiting for that one time where you let it out, for it to just, I remember crying on my yoga mat so many times, like that first year after my initial training, and when I was finding my mat, several times a week, where it was just like, floodgates. And it doesn't happen as much anymore, but it took me years of really, until I was able to sit with that and be with it and allow it. I kind of was running from it at first. I was dabbling and then running, and dabbling and running, and until I let myself just be in it and realize that it's not a weakness to feel the sadness and to feel all the emotions that I've been pushing away and kind of covering up with these other things. Or like you said, with the massage that I think I'm doing for my health, but I'm just bringing myself one more thing to resolve the temporary sensation. Yeah.
I mean, and I feel like responding to your question of like, what would you say to people? It probably would be to just to go through this process with just a lot of playfulness, actually, and a lot of lightness. And that's so helpful. And so that's kind of another thing that like I feel like we miss out sometimes. Like we think of yoga as a very serious practice. And I'm okay with that. It might suit you, but I think for the most of us, like we are already such serious beings. We do need more play. And so how can we, interact with with any yoga style that we're going into, and be very playful and light with it, and very like gentle with our body, knowing that we have been stuffing restrictions in our hips, in our shoulders, in our ankles, in our necks for pretty much our whole lifetimes. We are a predominantly sitting society, right? Like this is the first time really in probably all of mankind that like as youngsters too, for the last maybe 100 years since the Industrial Revolution, that we have been sitting as a society as we have been growing in our bones. So a lot of this focus of Kaiut Yoga and other yoga styles, right, is in the hips, because the hips is an area where we have a lot of emotions, both good and bad, that we've just stored in there. And sometimes it's fine. During some of these yoga trainings that I've been to, like the one in Toronto, there was a huge Um, I touched the hips with the really too much. I wanted to be like, I was coming with this, like, if I'm not doing something, then I'm not being productive mindset. I was like going for the maximum rather than going for the optimum level. And oftentimes the optimal level is actually like pulling back a bunch and just kind of scratching, peeling the onion layer by layer. It worked for me, and maybe it works for the listeners too. If you are in like a yoga training environment like the one we were in, it was a nice retreat in Ecuador or in Toronto, like it's retreated from your normal life. You can go that deep, and that's fine because you'll have the support. But if we're talking about like just a daily practice at home, and you have a family and you have kids and you have a job that's like, you have like another consistent routine, probably the best thing to do is just be light. Just show up with the lightness and make friends and see how much like fun you can have in a class. Do you have fun in your classes? Like, I'm sure besides teaching, do you take other people's classes still?
Oh yeah. I find every time I could take a new teacher's class or same teachers that I love, I pick something up from every experience, and I try to turn off my teacher brain as much as I can so I could just experience that. But yeah, I try to keep a blend of going out, experiencing one or two different teachers' classes a week if I can, and also having some of my own home practice because I find there are things that'll come up on my mat at home that I may not be able to get in another experience, or that I'll kind of be able to see how I'm digesting and able to find in my own lens the things that I'm practicing and picking up from other places. Yeah. But there is something about being in a space with other people, whether the people I'm practicing next to, the teachers that I'm learning from, the actual space that's been created, and the different healing that's happened there. I love to practice, and I think as a teacher, it's so important to maintain your own personal practice, because otherwise, where are you teaching from? And my personal practice, my teaching, it evolves every single day, every second of the day. Even if I think I'm going to teach the same heart chakra class 2 days in a row, it's never the same, So, but being in the moment and present and aware is what helps me to keep that lightness and fun. And yeah, I think that's a good reminder to remind myself, like, and to remind listeners that it doesn't have to be all at once. Like, don't think you need to, eat the whole apple in one sitting. You could take a little bite, see how that feels, digest it, sit with it. This is a lifelong process.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm going to share like some like feelings I have about you. And this is a practice I'm kind of moving into with like authentic relating. Like, I see you as this, like, you are super playful and light, and that you bring this like fun energy that we had, and I feel it now, just like I felt it in Ecuador. And at the same time, I also sense that, like, and it might be a reflection of what's within me as well. Like, there's also like some sort of like discipline, like I have to do something as well. And I feel like that's been ingrained maybe in you, just like it has been within me. And maybe just like honoring that, hey, that's who I am. Just shining that light might allow more of this light and playful side to come out. Yeah. How does that feel, hearing that? Is that fair to share after not speaking to you for about a year and a half?
Yes, it is. And your teaching, whenever I was around your energy, same with you. You have your big smile and your goofiness you bring to the situation. And at the same time, I know, there's been things that we've both been through that have been very life-changing in life. The way we look at life is, it's been hard, but it's also allowed us to be so much lighter. When you do lose someone, it's a mirror back to you, like, okay, I lost this person. What am I doing with my life? Like, I'm here, they aren't here. And because I've seen that darkness, it empowers me to step into my lightness whenever I can, because I know there's really dark parts of life, and that life can get really hard. And so why not be happy and light and joyful when we can? Because it's not always going to be like that. And it doesn't mean that I'm always a happy, light, enjoyable person, but I can step into that when I feel it and when I feel like it's the right situation. And I can also invite others as well as myself to sit in the darkness and the shadows as well,
Mm,
because they
mm,
all exist at the same time.
mm. Yeah, like I think I don't know if this would be a good analogy, but some sort of analogy is coming to me, which is like when we don't allow ourselves to feel like a strong event, such as the death of a friend, um, it's like we add weights to our joints, especially like we're just putting in like, let me just add like a 5 pound weight into my right hip, and then my left knee, and all different parts, and those just like stay with us. And I actually feel it. I actually feel like this heaviness, and that's fine. Like it doesn't mean that we need to erase those feelings or avoid them, right? That's what we've done in the past. Like, oh, I'm going to just smoke weed, and then I feel light and it works and I'm all up in my head. But what I think really needs to be done is that we feel those feelings. We feel the sadness or the grief, right? That was a big process for me after losing that close friend. And actually by feeling it, then I like envision, I can see it in my right hip, that pain, that like ball of restriction just like dissolves, and I'm walking lighter, and I'm experiencing people with a lot more lightness. This whole process of yoga for me, it's not one where we are necessarily inflicting pain. It's just one where we are noticing that the pain exists, because it does already exist within us, within these stories.
To find a little more balance in their lives, or if they're feeling these things, what's one thing they could start trying at home?
The best thing we can do is to like not speed up the process. Speeding up doesn't necessarily add results. We think it does because that's the world that we live in. But in the case of our bodies, with these emotions and these stories that we have within us, sometimes moving a lot slower, right? Again, at that optimal level, that what is your pace of progress? It's going to look very different than your teacher's pace, or than your friend's pace, or than your brother's or your mother's pace. So just honoring that. And if if you had 10 minutes today and you felt like, how can I slow it down? Later today, I'm going to be going on a walk with this gentleman who has walked from coast to coast over about a year. And he really believes in slowing things down as a way to really feel and process things, because in a car or in our fast-paced world, we're not able to do that. So if you have 10 minutes, either go for a walk and find just a tree. Like, this is what I'll do today. I'll bike to his house, but on the way there's a park that I know of, and I'm just going to find a tree, and I'm going to just lie down with my back on the mulch, which kind of hurts a little, but feels really good. And just put my legs up the side of the tree. And I'll have my eyes open at first, because it's just such a beautiful sight to see the sun reflecting the back of the leaves and sometimes coming through and hitting my face. And then I'll eventually just be like moved into this more inner natural state that is being like supported by this tree's kind of beautiful wisdom and knowledge. So that would be like a recommendation to anyone. Find a tree and put your legs up it and enjoy.
Naveed also tends to sit in Shavasana with his eyes open, everyone.
Yes.
I use
I
that
sure
as an
did.
example sometimes. Like, hey, you don't have to close your eyes. You can keep your eyes open for Shavasana. It's okay.
That has changed though, Heather. Yeah, I was noticing, like, I was like, why do I need to have my eyes open? And it was like wanting control still. And it was actually coming from this whole, like, I don't want to feel. And the moment you close your eyes, because 90%, I'm just making up that stat, but it feels right. 90% of like the stimuli that we receive is from our eyes. At the moment we close them, it gives access for all these other feelings to be there. And especially like in the yoga field, like the union of the body and mind. it really is enhanced if we can close our eyes. So I am an eye closer now, but naturally so. Like I don't force them. I don't hold my eyelids down. It just happens.
So in honor of Yoga for Balance, show title, what does balance look like and feel like to you?
I don't feel like there's a prescription for this. There's like no right way to find balance, I guess. So I can only really speak about the feeling, and it's just a feeling that probably my words won't be able to really describe, but I'll do my best. And it's like you just view everything in this like beautiful, positive regard. In the Kaiut Yoga practice, Francisco Kaiut would call this emotional coherence. And he says, imagine a dog, a stray dog, and this dog, he's not worried about where his next meal is going to come from. There's no like fear or anxiety. He just knows that he's going to be fed. So like in the spectrum of like negative and fearful emotions and positive and other ones, like he's just a little bit towards the positive side. Like he's not fearful where his food will come from, but he knows he's going to get fed. And humans, I believe we are the only creatures that like have this ability to not be present. Right? Every other animal, that's not something they can really, they can't be in the space that we can be in. And to me, nature and animals and trees and plants, they are in balance. So oftentimes, we think, oh, like, so then for me to be in balance, like I need to go to like live in the jungle, like I did in Ecuador for a week. And I need to go to the Rocky Mountains and like backpack. And that's fine. Like there's something really beautiful about that. I'm not going to say don't do that, but I think it's a good reminder to just know that like that inner nature, it also exists. I mean, that external nature that we view as like mountains and streams and beauty, it exists within us. So finding any tool, if it's your beautiful yoga practice, if it's your meditation, if it's your Reiki, if it's your sound healing, if it's just walking and talking with a good friend, any practice that makes you more present with that feeling inside, that to me feels like balance. There's a pose I go into, Sukhasana, with my legs crossed right in front of the left or left in front of the right. And I just flex forward. And I've created this memory that when I do that, I'm like tapping into this really deep forest that exists within me. And it almost like brings me to tears even just sharing it, because it's such a beautiful space. And I want that for everyone. Like I want that for you. And I want that for my mom and my dad and my neighbors, like to know that balance and nature is within you.
Thank you, Naveed. Thank you so much for sharing that beautiful insight and visual. And I hope everyone listening at home was able to absorb a little bit of your magic and wisdom. Thank you again to Naveed for taking the time to be here on the show and share your perspective with everyone listening. And thank you at home for listening. If you're enjoying these episodes, don't forget to subscribe to the Yoga for Balance podcast wherever you listen. And you can find full show notes on my website, vintantra.com, vintantra.com. Thank you, and until next time.